The autumn sun filtered through the tall, arched windows of the Ivywood University lecture hall, casting golden streaks over the rows of polished wooden desks that had seen generations of students pass through. On this particular morning, the air carried a quiet tension. The kind that precedes a spectacle everyone knows is about to happen, even if it hasn't been announced. Professor Nathaniel Stroud, the notoriously sharp-tongued head of the mathematics department, stood at the front, chalk poised between his fingers like a general ready to lead troops into battle. His reputation was infamous. Stroud relished in publicly dismantling students who, in his eyes, didn't belong in his advanced calculus class. To him, intellect was proven not through quiet competence but through surviving his verbal gauntlet. And more than one promising student had left his classroom in tears. That morning, his eyes scanned the room with a predator's focus until they settled on Denzel Washington, who sat in the third row, dressed in a crisp charcoal blazer, posture effortlessly composed. Denzel wasn't there for publicity. Despite being one of the most recognizable actors in the world, he had quietly enrolled in a semester-long course for personal enrichment, driven by a lifelong fascination with mathematics. Most students had done a double-take on the first day, whispering in hushed tones when they realized Hollywood royalty was sharing their textbook. But Denzel himself had treated the class like any other pursuit, serious, disciplined, and private. Professor Stroud, however, saw him differently. To Stroud, Denzel was an outsider, a man from the world of bright lights and scripted lines. A world Stroud dismissed as shallow compared to the rigors of higher mathematics. The professor's thin smile deepened as he tapped the chalk against the blackboard, a faint white dust cloud marking the beginning of his performance. "Mr. Washington," he called, his voice carrying the crisp enunciation of someone used to being obeyed. The room went silent. "Perhaps you can illuminate for us the solution to this problem," he continued, sketching an intimidating swirl of integrals, trigonometric functions, and limits across the blackboard. It was the kind of problem designed to chew up even the brightest undergraduates for hours. Denzel stood without hesitation, his eyes scanning the problem not with panic, but with the same focused curiosity he brought to a complex script. The chalk squeaked under Stroud's hand as he underlined the final term with dramatic flourish, clearly expecting hesitation, stammering, maybe even a humble admission of defeat. But Denzel simply nodded once, walked to the board with the calm assurance of a man who understood that genius is not in loud declarations, but in precise execution. He took the chalk from Stroud's hand, his movements deliberate, and began to work not hurriedly, not with showmanship, but with a clarity that spoke volumes. Each step flowed logically into the next, simplifying here, transforming there, rearranging the equation like an artist revealing the hidden image in a block of marble. Students leaned forward, eyes widening as they realized he wasn't just solving the problem, he was teaching them in the process, narrating quietly so they could follow the elegance of each maneuver. Stroud's smile faltered for the first time when Denzel, without consulting a single note, derived a general solution before narrowing it to the exact answer on the board, underlining it with a firm stroke. He placed the chalk down, not in triumph, but in quiet finality, as though the work spoke entirely for itself. For a moment the room was utterly still, silence so complete that the ticking of the wall clock sounded almost deafening. Then, a ripple of murmurs spread among the students' admiration, disbelief, excitement. His voice strained as he muttered, "Acceptable." But it was too late. Everyone had seen what had just happened. The calculus professor who prided himself on exposing weakness had just been dismantled, and the man who had done it hadn't raised his voice, hadn't sought applause. He had simply, undeniably, revealed himself to be a master in the very field Stroud thought he owned. The class ended with the usual shuffle of notebooks, the low buzz of conversation, and the scraping of chairs against the polished oak floor. But there was a new energy in the air, crackling, unspoken awareness that they had all just witnessed something extraordinary. Stroud retreated to his desk, flipping through a stack of papers with an exaggerated disinterest that fooled no one. His knuckles were tight around the edges of the folder he held, a subtle tell that the morning had not gone according to his well-rehearsed plan. Denzel, unbothered, gathered his materials with quiet efficiency, pausing only to help a fellow student retrieve a dropped pen. A group of 3 engineering majors approached him hesitantly, their faces bright with the kind of admiration normally reserved for someone walking a red carpet, yet here it was for mathematics. That substitution you made in step 3. I've never seen it used that cleanly, one of them blurted, still clutching a half-closed laptop as though afraid to lose the train of thought. Denzel smiled politely, explaining that it wasn't magic, just pattern recognitions, something he'd honed not only from studying, but from years of breaking down scripts, memorizing pages of dialogue, and finding the underlying rhythm of a character's thought process. To him, a mathematical problem was like a complex scene. If you understood the structure, you could navigate the emotion, or in this case, the logic, without getting lost. Unbeknownst to Denzel, Stroud was listening from the front, his pen tapping steadily against his gradebook. A plan began to form in the professor's mind. He wasn't about to let an actor, no matter how skilled, undermine his authority in front of his own class. The next week, Stroud orchestrated a trap. He announced that the midterm exam would feature not only advanced calculus, but also abstract algebra, topology, and a sprinkling of real analysis, topics barely touched in their coursework so far. Students groaned audibly, but Denzel simply nodded, his gaze steady. What Stroud didn't know was that Denzel had spent the past month not just reviewing the syllabus but diving far beyond it, working late into the night in his study with textbooks, stacked high, some still with the faint scent of the campus library. He had developed a habit of tackling problems until he could not only solve them, but explain the underlying principles in multiple ways. In his mind, this wasn't about outperforming anyone. It was about respecting the discipline, engaging with it fully, and proving to himself that mastery came from persistence, not pretense. When the day of the exam arrived, Stroud prowled the aisles like a hawk, pausing behind Denzel's desk long enough to watch his pen glide across the paper in fluid, confident strokes. The questions that had been designed to stump even the top students unfolded effortlessly under his methodical approach. For one problem involving a multivariable function constrained by an irregular boundary, Denzel sketched a 3-dimensional diagram in the margin, annotated with clear reasoning. Before delivering a concise, exact solution, Stroud moved on without comment, but his jaw was set tight. When the papers were graded, a single perfect score emerged from the stack, accompanied by notes so thorough that they could have served as a model answer key. Stroud stared at the name printed at the top, Denzel Washington. The next class? He announced the results with the same detached tone as always. But the subtle shift in the room's atmosphere was impossible to miss. Students glanced between the professor and Denzel, sensing an invisible battle of wills. Denzel didn't gloat. He simply sat back, eyes forward, as if acknowledging that the work spoke for itself. Yet, beneath the calm exterior, Stroud felt the sting of something deeper than academic defeat. It was the realization that true mastery could come from anywhere, even from someone the world thought they already knew. By the 3rd month of the semester, the silent duel between Professor Stroud and Denzel Washington had become the unspoken centerpiece of the class. Students no longer shuffled into their seats with sleepy indifference. They came with the anticipation of theatergoers awaiting the next act in a tense drama. It wasn't just about the math anymore. It was about watching 2 men of very eluded different worlds test the limits of each other's resolve. Stroud had begun structuring lectures in ways that, to the casual observer, seemed innocuous, but to anyone paying attention, were carefully designed to corner Denzel. He would slip in problems that required leaps of intuition without standard formulas, introduce proofs mid-discussion without preparation, or toss out open-ended conjectures designed to consume hours of thought. Most students would falter under this shifting terrain, yet Denzel adapted, his mind treating each challenge like an unscripted scene. He never interrupted, never raised his voice, but when called upon, he would stand and dismantle the problem with a precision that was both surgical and artistic. The chalk in his hand became a conductor's baton, orchestrating the logic into a seamless resolution. Some of the younger students began recording his board work on their phones, not for celebrity memorabilia, but as study tools, even students. From outside, the class began slipping into the back rows, curious to see what was making advanced calculus feel less like torture and more like revelation. But Stroud's pride was a deep, stubborn thing. And what might have been a healthy academic challenge to most had grown into something almost personal for him. He began holding optional problem sessions in the evenings, timed suspiciously when he knew Denzel had rehearsals or charity events. Yet, on more than one occasion, Denzel rearranged his schedule to appear, sitting quietly until called upon, and then answering with the same measured thoroughness as always. His preparation bordered on obsessive. Late at night, long after his public life was quiet, he worked at a large oak desk surrounded by notebooks filled with dense equations, each page marked with meticulous annotations. In one corner of the desk, a yellowed notebook lay open, a relic from his high school years, when a teacher had first planted the seed that math was not just a subject but a language, one worth learning fluently. That teacher's encouragement had never left him, and it was that memory, not competition, that fueled his determination. Still, Stroud escalated. In one particularly tense lecture, he presented a problem so convoluted it drew a collective groan. A triple integral over a non-rectangular region with a variable density function and a rotating coordinate system, layers upon layers of complexity. Denzel studied it for a long moment, his mind deconstructing the chaos into smaller, manageable pieces until the path became clear. As he worked, the class followed his reasoning in real time, each transformation bringing clarity from confusion. By the time he reached the final elegantly simplified answer, there was a quiet awe in the room. Stroud didn't comment. He simply erased the board without acknowledgement. Not before Denzel caught the fleeting, reluctant glimmer in the professor's eyes. It wasn't respect yet, not openly, but it was the first crack in the armor. And though neither man spoke of it, everyone in that room could feel that something was shifting. That the contest was no longer about humiliation or defense, but about two intellects circling each other, each beginning, perhaps unwillingly, to recognize the other's worth.